There is a hidden layer of culture that you will never be allowed to see, not because it doesn't exist, not because it was lost to time, but because someone bought it, locked it away, and decided that you don't get access to it. Right now, as you watch this video, there are private underground vaults beneath Geneva, Luxembourg, and Singapore holding more artistic and historical treasure than the Louvre, the British Museum, and the Smithsonian combined. Original manuscripts by Galileo. First edition Gutenberg Bibles, maps that charted empires before the modern world had a name for them. Letters written by hand by the architects of civilization that have never been digitized, never been photographed, never been seen by the public eye. And they never will be. High art, the real kind, has been transformed into a silent anchor for the powerful. It is no longer about beauty. It is no longer about cultural appreciation. It is a definitive lineage, a biological claim to authority kept far from the masses who fund the museums that display the replicas. What you see in those public galleries, those are the approved versions, the curated breadcrumbs. The acceptable narrative, the actual story, the one with receipts, is locked in temperature-controlled rooms behind biometric scanners, held by family offices you've never heard of, managed by lawyers who have signed lifelong non-disclosure agreements. Today, we are diving into the philosophy of preservation, the doctrine that turns heritage into an exclusive, guarded asset, the belief system that justifies hoarding civilization itself as a tool of permanent power. And by the time this video ends, you will never look at a museum, a private gallery, or a billionaire's philanthropic donation the same way again. Stay with me, because this goes deeper than you think. Let's begin with a question that most people never think to ask. Why would a billionaire, someone with more money than they could spend in 100 lifetimes, spend tens of millions of dollars acquiring a painting they plan to never display? A manuscript they'll never read publicly? A sculpture that will sit in the dark behind a steel door for the next 50 years? The answer is not passion. The answer is not ego. The answer is strategy. Welcome to the world of the Freeport. A Freeport is a tax-free, customs-free storage zone, typically located just outside the jurisdiction of any national authority, where the ultra-wealthy store assets that are technically in transit. In transit, legally, indefinitely. The artwork is always between destinations, which means it is never subject to import duties, capital gains taxes, or wealth declarations. The Geneva Freeport alone, a brutalist complex near the airport, is estimated to hold artwork worth over $100 billion. Let that number settle in. $100 billion of art in a warehouse, never seen, never displayed, never shared. This is not a side effect of wealth. This is a feature of it, because here is what the sophisticated mind understands. A masterpiece stored in a Freeport is not just an asset. It is a liquid, untaxable, internationally portable store of value, immune to inflation, immune to currency devaluation, and immune to the political whims of any single government. In 2008, when the global financial system nearly collapsed, the value of blue-chip art didn't crash with the stock market. In 2020, when entire economies were shuttered overnight, the private art market quietly reached record highs. During the inflationary spiral of 2022 and 2023, while ordinary people watched their savings erode, the auction houses that served the ultra-rich reported their most profitable years in history. The wealthy didn't just survive those crises. They used them to acquire more. But there's a dimension to this that goes beyond finance. There's a geopolitical dimension that almost no one talks about. When a powerful family, whether they're old European aristocracy, Gulf state royalty, or a new money tech dynasty, controls the physical possession of significant historical artifacts, they control something more valuable than the object itself. They control narrative leverage. Think about it. When a nation-state wants to reclaim a stolen artifact, a Greek urn, an Egyptian relief, an African ceremonial mask, they must negotiate. They must petition. They must, in some cases, beg. The private owner, shielded behind layers of legal entities registered across multiple jurisdictions, holds all the cards. Possession in the world of the elite is not 9/10 of the law. It is the law. The shift from public museum donations to private high-security bunkers is not accidental. For generations, the wealthy donated to institutions, the Met, the Getty, the Tate, in exchange for naming rights, tax deductions, and the soft glow of philanthropy. But something changed. The calculation shifted. Why donate what you can own? Why share a narrative when you can control it entirely? The vault became the new citadel. Not a fortress of stone and soldiers, but a fortress of provenance, legal title, and institutional complexity, more impenetrable than any castle wall ever built. Now I want to talk to you about something called a family office, because most people have never heard of this term, and understanding it is essential to understanding how old money operates at its highest level. A family office is a private firm that manages the financial, legal, administrative, and increasingly cultural affairs of an ultra-high net worth family. Not just their investments, not just their taxes, their identity, their story, their place in history. And one of the most sophisticated things these family offices do is curate private archives, not just art. Archives, primary documents, letters, diaries, legal records, correspondence with heads of state, contracts that shaped industries, photographs of historical moments that have never been published. The raw material of history, owned privately, managed carefully, and deployed strategically. Why? Because whoever controls the primary sources controls the historical record. Think about how history is written. Scholars, biographers, documentary filmmakers, they all depend on access to primary documents. A letter written by a founding father. A contract that reveals how a railroad empire was really built. A private communication between a politician and a banker that explains, more clearly than any textbook, why a particular law was passed or a particular war was started. When those documents are in a public archive, a national library, a university collection, any qualified researcher can access them. The truth, however uncomfortable, has a chance to emerge, but when those documents are in a private family archive, access is controlled, scholars must apply, applications must be approved, and the family, through their legal team, determines what is relevant, what is available, and what remains sealed. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is standard practice among the oldest and most powerful families in the Western world. The psychological impact of this cannot be overstated, because it means that the official history, the version taught in schools, referenced in court, cited in policy debates, reflects the narrative that powerful families have chosen to permit. Not necessarily the truth, the permitted truth. But the archive strategy goes even deeper than controlling what others know. It is about establishing what scholars call predestined leadership. The sense that a family's prominence is not merely the product of luck or exploitation, but of an ancient, almost divine continuity. When a family can demonstrate through own documents that their ancestors were present at every major turning point of civilization, that their great-great-grandfather corresponded with Lincoln, that their great-grandmother financed a Renaissance sculptor, that their family name appears in the footnotes of history for 4 centuries, they are not just wealthy, they are legitimate, and legitimacy in the long game of power is worth more than any amount of money. This is the transition from mere collection to the active engineering of a permanent family lineage. The artifacts don't just reflect a history, they manufacture one. Let's talk about knowledge, real knowledge, the kind that doesn't appear in a Google search. There are manuscripts in private hands right now that would fundamentally alter our understanding of history, of science, of religion, of geopolitics, of medicine. Not marginally, fundamentally. Texts that were thought lost. Documents that contradict the accepted timeline of events. Medical records from ancient institutions. Legal instruments from the formation of the modern state system that reveal agreements made between powerful families that have never been disclosed. And here is the quiet, uncomfortable truth. The people who own these documents have no legal obligation in most jurisdictions to make them available to the public. They are private property, full stop, but it goes beyond passive hoarding. Because increasingly, the ultra-wealthy are not merely sitting on this intellectual property. They are actively monetizing it through private research foundations. A private research foundation looks, on the surface, like a philanthropic endeavor. It funds scholars. It publishes research. It hosts conferences attended by the world's most respected academics. It appears to all outward observers to be advancing human knowledge, but look more carefully at who controls the foundation's agenda. Look at who sits on the board. Look at which questions the foundation funds research into, and which questions it conspicuously never asks. Private research foundations allow the ultra-wealthy to set global intellectual standards while bypassing every mechanism of public scrutiny. The peer review process, the university tenure system, the government grant apparatus, all of it bypassed. Replaced by a privately controlled pipeline from question to conclusion, managed by people whose financial interests are directly tied to the outcome of that research. This is the gatekeeping of historical insight as a competitive advantage, and it operates at a level of sophistication that most people never even think to question, because it wears the respectable clothing of philanthropy and academic rigor. Consider what this means for your generation specifically. You grew up in an era when expertise was earned through decades of work and verified through institutional credibility. When a professor at Oxford or Yale or the Sorbonne published a conclusion, it carried weight because of the process behind it, the independent research, the peer review, the institutional accountability. That system is being quietly circumvented by private money. Not destroyed, circumvented, so that it still appears to function. So that the conclusions it produces still carry the same institutional credibility, but the questions being asked, and the answers being funded, are no longer entirely independent. The elite have discovered that controlling the narrative of the past is the most effective way to shape the decisions of the present, and they are funding that control with extraordinary precision. Now I want to talk about something that may surprise you, because what I'm about to describe is not just a strategy of the old guard. It is a behavior that is accelerating right now in 2026, among a generation of new ultra-high net worth individuals who understand something that most of us are only beginning to grasp. The digital world is fragile. I don't mean fragile in the sense that the internet might go down. I mean fragile in a deeper, more philosophical sense. Digital information is infinitely reproducible and therefore infinitely manipulable. A photograph can be altered in seconds. A video can be deepfaked in minutes. An article can be retroactively edited, its original version lost forever, with no record of what changed. We are living through what historians will one day call the age of epistemic uncertainty, a period in which the reliability of any single piece of digital information is fundamentally in question, because the technology to fabricate it perfectly is now widely available. Think about what artificial intelligence has done to the concept of proof. In 2020, if someone showed you a video of a public figure saying something outrageous, you had reasonable grounds to believe it was authentic. Today, in 2026, no such assumption is safe. The AI-generated hallucination, the fabricated quote, the invented historical document, the deep-faked archival footage, is indistinguishable from the real thing to any viewer without access to original source material. Now here is the question that the most sophisticated minds in the world are asking. If digital information can no longer serve as reliable proof of what happened, what can? The answer is physical. A handwritten letter, sealed with wax, on paper that carbon dates to 1847, bearing handwriting that forensic analysts have verified against a dozen authenticated comparisons. That is proof. Not because it's old, because it is physically real in a way that no digital file can be. A first edition book, printed on specific paper with specific ink, with specific typographical characteristics that match the known output of a specific press in a specific city in a specific decade. That is proof. Physical artifacts are the last remaining proof of work for human civilization. They are the chain of custody that connects the present to the past in a way that cannot be fabricated, cannot be edited, and cannot be denied. And the ultra-wealthy know this. This is why we are seeing an extraordinary acceleration in the acquisition of rare books, manuscripts, maps, letters. and physical art by high-net-worth individuals who have never previously been collectors. They are not buying for beauty. They are not buying for status. They are buying for proof. They are building private arsenals of verifiable reality in a world where verifiable reality is becoming the scarcest commodity on Earth. The rare book market, historically a quiet backwater of the cultural economy, has seen price increases that rival the most aggressive segments of the cryptocurrency and tech equity markets. Not because more people suddenly love old books, because more people suddenly understand what old books represent in a world drowning in AI-generated noise. They represent certainty. And certainty, right now, is priceless. We have arrived at the final and perhaps most important dimension of this conversation, because everything we've discussed, the vaults, the archives, the foundations, the physical proof, all of it is in service of a single overarching objective: the determination of what future generations will consider to be the definitive human canon. The canon, in literature, in art, in history, in philosophy, is not a neutral list. It is a curated selection. It reflects the values, the aesthetics, and the priorities of the people who compiled it. And for most of human history, those people were the powerful, the church, the state, the aristocracy. The 20th century represented a partial democratization of the canon. Public universities, public libraries, government-funded arts programs. For a brief window of time, the question of what culture was worth preserving became at least partially a public conversation. That window is closing. As public institutions are defunded, as university endowments are redirected, as government arts programs are dismantled or marginalized, the curation of culture is reverting rapidly to private hands. And those private hands belong to people with very specific ideas about which stories deserve to survive. Consider the ethical tension embedded in this moment. There is a genuine argument to be made that private preservation saves things that would otherwise be lost. That a billionaire who buys a fragile medieval manuscript and stores it in a climate-controlled vault is, in some meaningful sense, preserving it better than a cash-strapped public institution could. That private money has rescued art that would have deteriorated in neglect. This argument is not wrong, but it obscures something critical. Preservation for survival and preservation for strategic exclusion are not the same thing. And the distinction between them, the line between stewardship and hoarding, is precisely the line that the philosophy of private collection crosses, deliberately and without apology. When a family preserves a manuscript and allows scholars to access it, they are stewarding culture. When that same family preserves a manuscript and uses controlled access to shape the conclusions of those scholars, to ensure that the historical narrative that emerges from that document reflects their interests, they are doing something qualitatively different. They are not preserving history. They are editing it. And here is the final, most sobering realization I want to leave you with. Pop culture, the movies, the music, the trends, the memes, is inherently ephemeral. It rises. It captivates. It fades. Within a generation, most of what passes for culture today will be forgotten or remembered only as a curiosity. That has always been true, and it will always be true, but the curated history held in private vaults, that is being engineered for permanence. It is being structured to outlast not just the people who own it, but the civilizations those people inhabit. It is designed to be the source material from which future historians, future artists, future leaders draw their understanding of who we were and what we valued. The families investing in these silent anchors of identity are not thinking about the next quarter. They are not thinking about the next decade. They are thinking about the next century, about the version of history that will be taught in schools 200 years from now, about which names will appear in the footnotes of textbooks that don't yet exist. They are building a legacy not just for their children, but for the entire future of human civilization on their own terms, according to their own priorities and their own interest. And they are doing it quietly, legally, in plain sight, while the rest of the world watches Netflix. Now I'm going to ask you to do something. Not share this video, though I hope you will. Not subscribe, though that helps more than you know. I'm going to ask you to think. because you have just spent the last few minutes looking behind a curtain that most people never even know exists. You now understand that the preservation of culture is not a neutral act, that the institutions you trust to tell you the truth about the past are in many cases dependent on the goodwill of private interests who curate what you are allowed to know. That is not a comfortable realization. It is not supposed to be. But knowledge, real knowledge, has never been comfortable. The people we celebrate as the great thinkers of history, the ones whose ideas changed the world, were almost universally people who looked at the accepted narrative and asked, what if that's not the whole story? What if there's something we're not being shown? You just asked that question, and you found an answer that most people will spend their entire lives never encountering. If this resonated with you, if it confirmed something you already suspected, or if it genuinely changed the way you see the world, then do one thing. Share this video with one person who is ready to hear it. Not everyone is, but you know someone who is, because the philosophy of preservation runs on secrecy. And the only thing that disrupts secrecy is conversation. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell. Because the next video in this series goes even deeper into the specific families, the specific institutions, and the specific mechanisms by which old money controls the cultural future of the modern world. You won't want to miss it. And more importantly, you won't be able to unsee it. I'll see you there.